Welcome, Seekers of Adam, to the final video on the food of Fallout. With so many consumable items, it has been quite an undertaking, but some of the food mentioned here has some really interesting lore when you would least expect it. Before I begin, I just want to mention that I am not covering all consumables that would be considered food. Vegetables and fruits will be part of their own video series. So if you're upset that I don't mention your favorite Fallout vegetable, fear not, it will come in Adam's time. On to the video. One of the notorious foods that spans the entire series are the curious iguana bits. This is not some sort of marketing name, they are literally bits of iguana meat with chunks of vegetables cooked on a skewer. In the first Fallout, this consumable heals for a small amount of HP, and if bits of iguana just aren't enough for you, you can opt for the iguana on a stick that has a whole iguana with a skewer rammed through widthwise rather than lengthwise, which would make it cook just so unevenly. Come on, Fallout. Iguana on a stick heals for a bit more HP and can be used to calm Dogmeat down in Fallout 1 when first encountering him, allowing him to join your party. Fallout 2 features both items in the same form and with the same effects, and it is a common food item in the Fallout 2 Wasteland. Fallout Tactics does not have iguana bits, but does have iguana on a stick in an altered form that has the skewer going through lengthwise, as it should, but it also looks a lot less like an iguana. But to be fair, I don't think I've ever seen a whole cooked iguana before, so maybe it should end up looking like a little rubber dinosaur. Otherwise, it functions just like previous games, replenishing a moderate amount of HP. Although iguana bits do not show up in Fallout Tactics, they re-emerge in Fallout 3 in a form that looks like a rotting shish kebab. Healing for 5 points and dosing for 3 rads, it is a very common food across the Wasteland and can be bought from many merchants and be found in people's inventory and dinner plates all throughout DC. New Vegas has the same iguana bits model and effect as Fallout 3, but iguana bits can be part of many recipes in New Vegas, like blood sausage and the mushroom cloud recipe. Fallout 4 changes the look quite a bit by having iguana bits be found in a can, but is still very common and heals for a small amount of HP, 15 in this case, and 5 rads. Fallout 76 also shows iguana bits in a can, and according to the item details, is raw meat and can be cooked for more HP replenishment. I just want to know why in Adam's name is the meat yellowish green to begin with, since iguana meat is just a normal pink color. That isn't the weirdest thing about iguanas in Fallout though, because even though it is one of the most common food items you can possibly encounter, the player can never see an actual iguana in-game. Hashtag iguanas aren't real. It is never explained where this meat comes from or why the iguana meat lobby seems so powerful in post-war America. Equally as strange, there is an iguana species, the desert iguana, that naturally inhabits the American Southwest and would make sense if it were the kind of iguana that is naturally found in the areas of Fallout and Fallout 2. However, the model clearly shows a green iguana, which lives in rainforest environments and wouldn't survive in the desert without some mutations. The first Fallout has Doc Morbid, who sells off-brand iguana bits to Iguana Bob at the hub. And when I say off-brand iguana bits, what I mean is human meat. Fortunately for the player, these appear in-game as chunks on a stick, so beware of the mystery meat. So as far as iguanas go, I can think of a few possibilities. 1. The green iguana mutated to the point that it could survive outside of tropical and subtropical environments, allowing them to spread across the United States, but it wouldn't explain why we can't find any in the wild. 2. That iguana meat was actually very popular in pre-war America, since cans of raw iguana meat can be found in Fallout 76, which took place not long after the Great War, which could be evidence that it was processed before the Great War, and people have been relying on iguana meat only for that reason. The third reason I can think of is that it is relatively well known in the Wasteland as a decent food source, so it is in high demand everywhere, leading a lot of unscrupulous characters to use whatever kind of meat that they can get a hold of and pass off as iguana meat, similar to Doc Morbid. These are the ideas I could come up with. If you have a good idea as to why iguana meat seems so popular and prevalent in the entire Wasteland from the east to the west coast, then leave a comment because I am super curious what you guys can come up with. Unlike iguanas, Brahmin are very common livestock in the Wasteland, and consequently, there are a number of foods that are derived from them. Brahmin Wellington is one of the fanciest options in the Mojave and can be crafted or bought at the Gourmand, which is the high-class restaurant at the Ultralux. It is made with Brahmin meat, of course, but also ant eggs and Blamco mac and cheese. It can restore a hefty 130 HP and can satiate up to 300 points in hardcore mode. The obvious inspiration here is the beef Wellington, which is made out of a fillet of steak wrapped and cooked in a puff pastry. This does not dose the player with any rads, but it also kind of looks like a giant heart. There are several mentioned Brahmin-based foods in Fallout 2. The character Rose in MODOK has an entire menu of items that are never represented in-game and are only mentioned. Brahmin dogs are such an item. Likewise, Brahmin en broche and Brahmin pot pie are other unattainable dishes that are mentioned by Rose. Probably the best Brahmin-based food though are the Brahmin fries that are available again from Rose and MODOK. They are battered and fried Brahmin testicles, and in the game, the players offered to try and beat the current eating record of 36. And if they can eat more than that without throwing up, they don't have to pay for their meal. Funny enough, the Vault Dweller's official cookbook has a recipe for Brahmin fries, although it involves ground beef and hard or soft-boiled eggs, which isn't exactly being subtle there. These are inspired by lamb fries, which are battered and fried lamb testicles, and the movie Funny Farm, where the main character tries to beat an eating record for these testy morsels. I will not apologize for that. As much as I love talking about eating animal reproductive organs, let's hop over to something most of us can agree is quite delicious: s'mores. Fallout 76 lets you craft one of the few Fallout food items I would actually eat by combining wood, which is likely for the fire, syrup, sugar, spices, razor grain flour, Brahmin milk, and bone. So maybe I take that back, because other than perhaps making gelatin from the bone, I don't really know what it would be used for in this specific recipe. All of these ingredients only end up making an item that heals for 45 HP and gives you 8 rads, so I don't know if it's even really worth it. Looking at the picture, it looks pretty good, and it also looks like it might have 2 layers of chocolate, one on top and one on bottom. But I'm only accustomed to having 1 layer of chocolate. How many of you are double layer chocolate s'mores people? I want to know if that's a popular thing or not. It was only a matter of time before people started looking at one of the most dangerous creatures in the Wasteland and thought to themselves, but can I eat it? Deathclaw dishes aren't particularly common, but there are more than a couple. Fallout 4 and 76 both have recipes for the Deathclaw egg omelet, which rather surprisingly looks exactly what you would expect an omelet to look like. Replenishing a respectable 115 HP, the in-game spelling also opts for the British spelling of omelet instead of the American spelling, which is super inconsequential, but I thought it was funny. If you have a few extra ingredients, you can make the so-called tasty Deathclaw omelet, which, if you're going to risk life and limb to get a Deathclaw egg, why settle for anything less than a tasty one? Seriously, that omelet better be the most delicious thing you can get, right behind Fancy Lad snack cakes, of course. A mute fruit, which, slight tangent here, I always thought that pronunciation was mutt fruit until I heard an NPC in-game call it a mute fruit. Back on topic. A mute fruit, a carrot, and a blood pack will give you the tasty Deathclaw egg, which in addition to 115 HP regen, will also give you plus 50 to max HP for a bit of time. In case the mention of a blood pack didn't faze you, I just want to come back to that. Blood packs, aka bags of human blood, are used in this recipe, so that's nice. Luckily, the recipe in the Fallout official cookbook is devoid of blood, human or otherwise. Fallout 4 and 76 have the Deathclaw Wellingham and Deathclaw Wellington respectively, which is a souffle cooked in a can. You wouldn't know that by the ingredients though, which asks for a Deathclaw egg, a tato, and dirty water to make the Wellingham, and boiled water, Deathclaw egg, Deathclaw meat, pepper, and wood for the Wellington isn't that much better. Increasing HP by 115, the reason for the name difference between the two is because in Fallout 4, the Mr. Handy that makes the Deathclaw Wellingham is named Wellingham. Fallout 76 introduces the ever so enticing swamp tofu that can be made into a swamp tofu soup. The tofu is made from just a swamp plant, and I'm sure a process that is similar to how normal tofu is made. Otherwise, this name wouldn't really make much sense. The process to make tofu involves soaking the soybeans, crushing them, and boiling them. Afterwards, the pulp and milk are separated and the solid portion can be pressed into tofu. I think it is reasonable to assume a similar process for the swamp tofu, which heals 1 HP for 25 seconds, which isn't all that impressive, but the soup, which takes an extra gourd, water, and salt, will heal for 60. Fallout New Vegas gives us one of the healthiest options available to Wastelanders, and that is the desert salad. Many of you probably weren't aware of this craftable item, but if you are playing survival, this is a great option due to how much it satisfies both hunger and thirst. Looking like a salad you could order from just any restaurant, it is made with a barrel cactus fruit, a Brahmin steak, and pinion nuts, which are the rarest of the ingredients and, to borrow a term from chemistry, would definitely be the limiting reactant. If you aren't playing hardcore, then the 7 hit points per second for 15 seconds might not be worth the trouble to craft this item. One thing I love is that it is obvious the salad has tomatoes and lettuce by looking at it, and none of those items are in any way similar to the actual ingredients. The desert salad recipe in the Fallout cookbook is a bit closer, with ground beef and beans, among other things. So when I use the word stinky to describe a food dish, what would you think of? Cheese? There are a lot of good cheeses that don't really smell great. Maybe some vegetables like Brussels sprouts or broccoli when they're cooked. If you are a real know-it-all, then you might think of something like the durian, or some more obscure cultural fermented foods. Fallout Tactics saw it necessary to introduce the stinky meat platter, which looks as gross as it sounds. Now I would bet a stash of caps that it stinks as bad as it looks. In what may be one of a few items I would term anti-consumables or anti-chems, the stinky meat platter can be encountered in one spot, Rock Falls, and adds 1 measly HP while decreasing endurance by 2, radiation resistance by 25, and damage resistance by 25 as well. So if you are role-playing as a masochist or Fallout Tactics is too easy for you, by all means, eat what the game refers to as a selection of meats in surprising states of decay, garnished with maggots. Don't worry though, it is still full keto. There are a number of soups and stews that can be made from various critters and vegetables throughout the Wasteland that range from looking and sounding pretty good to being downright deplorable. Starting with the most mysterious of all Wasteland meats, and no, that is not a euphemism, the iguana. Fallout 4 and 76 feature iguana soup, which consists of dirty water, a carrot, and iguana bits, which heal for 95 HP, and a slightly different recipe in Fallout 76 that heals for a little less, but has the curious effect of increasing luck by 3 for a limited time. Surprisingly, one of the only recipes that includes rad stag meat is the rad stag stew in Fallout 4 and 76. Being otherwise pretty unremarkable, it will heal for 150 hit points in Fallout 4 and increase energy resistance by 30 for 60 in-game minutes. What it is about rad stags that could induce such an effect, I have no idea, but the effect is the same in Fallout 76 except increasing energy resistance by 35. So-called chicken noodle soup is first introduced in Far Harbor using a rad chicken thigh and a few more ingredients that are noticeably not noodles. It imparts an average amount of HP replenishment, but more importantly, increases radiation resistance, which would be great use on the island blanketed in the big, beautiful, holy, radioactive fog. Sorry, sometimes I get a little carried away. Fallout 76 flips the effect from being radiation resistance to disease resistance, which is a very appropriate effect and may be due to the Fallout 76 recipe lacking carrots and blood leaves. In Fallout New Vegas, the Demented Cook has a recipe that is somehow less horrific than one might actually expect if you know anything about Cook. Rather than being the charred remains of NCR troopers, Cook's Fiend Stew uses beer, Brahmin meat, a potato, and a jalapeno, which could make a pretty banging stew if I'm being honest. Increasing strength by 1 and HP by 120. Squirrel Stew was introduced in Fallout 3 and featured in every game since. It is unsurprisingly made of squirrels, or so they say, even though we never see a squirrel until Fallout 76. It is a common item, so only heals for 5 HP in early games, but gets a major buff in Fallout 4, where adding bloodleaf, a carrot, a potato, and squirrel bits will make a rather fine looking stew for Wasteland standards. I mean, just look. We went from this to this. Prison food, Mom's Home Cooking, Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, Fallout New Vegas. My cooking skills, Rad Queen's cooking skills. It heals for 105 HP while also increasing experience points earned by 2% for 2 hours, which is a mighty jump from only giving 5 HP and a few rads in Fallout 3. Fallout 76 upgrades it to the Tasty Squirrel Stew with a very similar recipe, and the end result is 60 HP and 10% to XP gained for 60 minutes. I just want you all to remember, every time you eat some delicious and filling squirrel stew, the squirrels look like this. So beautiful. Fallout 76 isn't done yet. We have the Scorch Beast Mixed Meat Stew, which has some pretty impressive stat boosting effects. The name would seem to imply that there are many types of meats from different animals, but it is meaning different types of Scorch Beast meat, like Scorch Beast brain, heart, liver, lung, and just generic meat. With Scorch Beasts being giant, irradiated, and FEV mutated bats. Considering this pandemic we had to deal with for the last 2 years, I don't think chowing down on Scorch Beast may be the best idea. The last soups are only mentioned by Rose in Fallout 2, one of which is Shepherd's Stew, which is a popular kind of stew in many areas, although it can vary a bit region to region, and the other is Cabbage Soup. Fallout New Vegas has Fire Ant Fricasse, which can only be made with fire ant meat, cram, and flour that only replenishes 60 HP. Before some game updates, the recipe required Cazador eggs and 2 pieces of fire ant meat, but that was changed because the relatively modest benefits that came from the item couldn't justify some of these ingredients. Fricasses are, generally speaking, a stew with browned meat that is then cooked in the cooking stock. In this case, either the fire ant meat, which I imagine to be a pretty lean meat, or the cram. A dish called Fricasse Floater was another menu item from Rose in Fallout 2. We touched on squirrel stew before, and the paradox between how ubiquitous squirrel-based food is while never seeing an actual squirrel anywhere. Squirrel on a stick is another very common food item introduced in Fallout 3. Healing 5 HP for 2 rads. Fallout New Vegas features it almost exactly the same as in Fallout 3. It will satiate for 75 in hardcore mode, which is pretty good considering it is such a small and cheap food item. Camp Forlorn Hope subsists almost exclusively on Squirrel because of the dire circumstances surrounding the camp's ability to get supplies and the support needed from the NCR. Fallout 4 shows the squirrel on a stick as chunks of meat on a skewer, as opposed to one large chunk and heals for 45 HP. Fallout 76 features this tasty morsel as well, but includes a recipe which requires boiled water, squirrel bits, corn, and sugar, which seems to be overcomplicating what is probably just a survival food, but maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about because squirrel has never been on my menu. Far Harbor introduced the Gulper Slurry, which is a very strange mix of ingredients that results in a food that does not increase HP, but rather induces invisibility for 10 seconds. So while it does not have the longevity of a stealth boy, it can be crafted with, get this, Gulper innards, purified water, acid, and crystal. I cannot even begin to imagine how this would work, chomping down on bits of crystal and acid with Gulper guts. This would honestly make more sense if it were a chameleon Deathclaw meat or something, since Gulpers don't ever exhibit any kind of invisibility themselves. I want to hear some of your thoughts in the comments as to how this could theoretically work. Noodles were first introduced in Fallout 3 and are also found in Fallout New Vegas. They are rather unremarkable but commonly found throughout the Wasteland, and heal for a paltry 5 HP with 2 rads. In Fallout 4 and 76 it becomes the Noodle Cup, is much more enticing looking, and heals for 40 HP and no additional rads. It is interesting to note that Wastelanders can be found enjoying a noodle cup, eating them with chopsticks. In Fallout 76, it heals for 20 HP while also dosing for 2 rads and comes in a different looking bowl from all the other soups. Radscorpions have been part of the series from the first game, and it comes as no surprise that Wastelanders have found good and gross ways to turn these oversized arachnids into food. The first Radscorpion derived food is the Radscorpion Egg Omelet, and tasty Radscorpion Egg Omelet. The difference between the two is a few extra ingredients like pepper and potato for the tasty omelet, and comes with an additional 15 HP over the normal omelet, and carries the benefit of curing all addictions, which is a very powerful effect. Looking like a normal omelet, I really have to wonder exactly how they are getting Radscorpion eggs. Scorpions give birth to live young, although the Scorplings, as the young are referred to, do hatch from eggs internally within the mother. So there are 2 possibilities. One is that the eggs are harvested from the bodies of Radscorpions, or 2 that they have evolved to lay eggs rather than giving live birth. The first is the more likely of the 2 scenarios since there is a drop chance for Radscorpion eggs upon killing a Radscorpion. Fallout 76 also has the Radscorpion Fillet, which requires Radscorpion meat and eggs in addition to water and pepper. It restores over 80 HP and increases energy resistance by 35 as well. The picture gives the impression that they are bisecting slices of a leg, or perhaps even the tail, but it can be difficult to say for sure. Mom's Diner offers 3 Radscorpion options: the Radscorpion en croûte, which refers to something baked into a crust, a Radscorpion stew, and steamed Radscorpion tails in drawn butter, which I imagine is something similar to steamed crab, or lobster, since they are all part of the same phylum. Lastly, in Fallout New Vegas, Ruby from Prim can be coaxed into making Ruby's casserole, once the player provides her with some venom glands. While certainly not amazing, healing for only 30 HP and lowering hunger by 100 in hardcore mode, it can be a good early game method of getting decent food. It is unknown how the venom enhances the casserole, but according to Ruby, don't eat the casserole with an open sore in the mouth since it will kill you dead. That sounds about right for the Wasteland. Fallout 4 gives us the Yao Guai Roast that uses a carrot, potato, and Yao Guai meat, and honestly looks great. It is quite a powerful item as well, healing for a rocking 210 HP and plus 10 to melee damage for 60 minutes. Fallout 76 has a similar recipe but nerfs the item drastically, only healing for 90 HP, dosing for 5 rads, and adding no other benefits. Maybe the Yao Guai up in the Commonwealth are better fed than in Appalachia. Or maybe those Boston Bruins are just juicing. Fallout 76 has the Firecap Soufle, which is a mashed firecap fungus that is baked into little cakes for 60 HP, 2 rads, and plus 35 to energy resistance. And that's it. There really isn't much more to say about this. Fallout New Vegas lets players craft trail mix with apples, pears, piña nuts, and sugar bombs, which honestly seems like it'd be pretty good if the fruit is dried. In hardcore mode, it lowers hunger by 150 while also adding 3 rads, plus 5 action points, and plus 5 hit points for 15 seconds. It is shown in-game and in the Pip-Boy as a Vault-Tec lunchbox, which is probably not a bad way to store the trail mix if we're being honest. Introduced in Fallout New Vegas, the Blood Sausage is a non-craftable consumable that heals for 60 HP and increases max HP by 10 for 4 minutes. Blood sausage is a popular sausage in some European countries where a filler is added to the blood until it is somewhat solid and processed into sausages. The funny thing about that though is that it shares the exact same model as Iguana bits. So, in other words, nothing like a sausage, and an altogether different icon in the Pip-Boy. This is used in the Black Blood Sausage recipe that also requires wine, mutant cave fungus, and xander root, but actually looks like a real sausage this time, so at least we've got that. It increases HP by 200 and plus 25 to max hit points for 4 minutes. Both blood sausages for some reason do not decrease hunger or water levels in hardcore mode, and interestingly, both sausages are banned items that cannot be taken into the fort or consumed by those in the Legion. The reason for this is not made clear. However, historians have argued whether or not Roman soldiers ate meat, and if so, what percent of their diet consisted of meat. Perhaps the restriction on blood sausage is a detail that Kaiser interpreted from the Roman histories that he read. If you do know the actual reason, please write it in the comments and I'll feature it in my highlights. The Cranburger is a very creative creation from Fallout 76, which is a pretty simple bunless burger with the patty made out of cram. Requiring boiled water, a potato, and Mirelurk eggs, the end result doesn't look too bad and the recipe itself also doesn't sound bad at all. Maybe I'm just really hungry right now, I don't know, but I would totally try this out. Healing for 60 HP and increasing carry weight by 20 for a time, it also doses for 10 rads, which is on the high side for items we've spoken of in this video. Given that cram is a spoof of Spam, that is kind of fun to say actually, then it is most likely made of processed pork, making it the real hamburger. Another burger known as the Canis burger is made by Rose in Fallout 2, but this one is decidedly less appealing, unless you're starving, which most Wastelanders are. It is made from the most prime dog meat selections, and the meat is slow cooked over Brahmin dung. Yay. I'm actually surprised that there are not more types of variations of hamburgers, given how much hamburgers have come to represent America and its food. Perhaps we can chalk it up to lost knowledge due to the Great War. The most satiating item in all of Fallout New Vegas is the Caravan Lunch, which reduces hunger by 200 and is represented by a Vault-Tec lunchbox that is crammed full of pre-war food. Yes, that's right. The most satiating of all the food items consists solely of pre-war food. Made up of cram, Instamash, pork and beans, and a lunchbox, somehow this does not confer any rads to the player, even though it's a bunch of pre-war food. It gets stranger, however, since the Caravan Lunch heals and satiates a lot more than the individual items. But, altogether, the individual items are worth more than the Caravan Lunch. This meal is seriously confusing. Early on, the lunch also required a radaway that would reduce radiation, but not quite as well as just a solitary radaway, which may imply that the radaway was used in part to make the pre-war food non-radioactive. If that is the case, then that would have some very interesting implications. But alas, here we are with this tasty contradiction. In what has become a pretty common trend throughout this video, Far Harbor introduced a new food item, in this case the seasoned rabbit skewers, and it went on to be included in Fallout 76 as well. Rad rabbits are found on the island of Bar Harbor. which I must say I really like the addition of smaller prey animals in Far Harbor because it makes the world feel more natural as opposed to every single animal that you find being hostile and very dangerous. And these rad rabbits can drop a rabbit leg when killed. Combined with aster, black bloodleaf, blight, and lure weed, which are all items that can only be found in Far Harbor, this food item will heal for 45 HP, but what is really interesting is that it will increase luck by 1. This is the only consumable in Fallout 4 that will increase luck that is not addictive, since Day Tripper and Excel will both increase luck but have a high chance of addiction. Fallout 76 carries on this tradition of mediocre HP plus 1 to luck. Only the recipe there simply requires wood for cooking and a rabbit leg, so it is much easier to craft. The obvious connection between the increased luck and the rabbit leg is the tradition of a lucky rabbit's foot, which never worked for me. Then again, I never tried eating one. While we're on the subject of increasing luck, Fallout 76's seared venison with berries will increase luck by not 1, but by 3 for a period of time. It also increases HP by a hefty 250 and only doses for 2 rads somehow, requiring Starlight berries, purified water, pepper, and radstag meat. This can be a real benefit if the player can collect all the ingredients in the required amounts. Starlight berries can also be used to create a Starlight berry cobbler in Fallout 76 that looks absolutely nothing like a cobbler and everything like a pumpkin pie. This game is literally unplayable. It has surprisingly low HP replenishment at 25 HP, but increases endurance by 1 for 30 minutes. The only ingredients are Starlight berries and wood, meaning you don't end up with a cobbler or anything else close to a Starlight berry dessert, and instead would probably just have mashed up and heated berries. Given the importance of cranberries in pre-war West Virginia, there's a whole section of the map dedicated to where they used to be farmed, and there are several in-game foods that are made from cranberries. Just like the Starlight berry cobbler, there's a cranberry cobbler that once again looks exactly like a pumpkin pie, and once again only requires cranberries and wood. I'm beginning to wonder if anyone at Bethesda has ever cooked anything ever. Once again, it is a meager 25 HP bonus, but increases XP earned for some time by 5%, so that's cool. Cranberry jam can be crafted as well, increasing HP by 45 and increasing damage resistance by 10 for only 1 rad. The recipe is thankfully more complex than the cobbler we spoke about previously, requiring carrot flowers, sugar, water, and diseased cranberries? Diseased? Like we can't have cranberry jam made from just normal cranberries? Maybe it's a flavor thing, I don't know. The cranberry meatball grinder is a very interesting item made with purified water, cranberries, not the diseased kind this time, spices, and scorch beast meat. Alright, that last one is pretty sus, but this sandwich ends up looking pretty good and is definitely something I would try. I did not know that the name grinder was used in the context of sandwiches, meant to refer to sandwiches with hot fillings as opposed to subs, which are meant to refer to cold fillings. Maybe this is a regional thing, but where I'm from, we just call them all subs, and I'm just some uncivilized monster enjoying my hot meatball sub. Anyway, for only 2 rads, you get 250 HP and plus 40 to max HP for some time, making this a solid food choice. Cranberry relish looks like cranberry jam and has an identical recipe, except it also requires a gourd and normal cranberries, not those nasty diseased ones. Eating it will only net you close to 50 HP, but gives you a 10% XP boost for an hour, making it one of the best consumables for boosting XP. I also find it funny that the player would go to the trouble of making things like jam and relish, only to eat it straight out of the can, rather than combining it with some other food item. And before you tell me that it's totally normal to sit down and eat a whole jar of jam, stop it. No, it isn't. Potato salad is another Fallout 76 invention that doesn't look too bad and consists, unsurprisingly, of potatoes, but also some Brahmin milk and sugar. It increases HP by 45 and max HP by 35 for 4 rads, but also has a more attractive cousin, the Potato Salad Surprise. Said by others to have some sort of kick to it, it trades the Brahmin milk for thistle, which makes it regenerate AP for a bit of time for the same HP bonus and only 1 more rad of radiation. I have never eaten anything with thistle before, but apparently it has a pretty mild taste, and most of us have already tried a kind of thistle before since artichokes are considered part of the thistle family. And now you know. The Wasteland Omelet is a New Vegas concoction that is a very filling and HP regenerating meal. Decreasing hunger by 150 and HP by 4 points per second for 100 seconds, it can be found sold on the strip, or can be crafted with Blamco mac and cheese, crunchy mute fruit, lake lurk meat, and a Deathclaw egg. I just want to draw your attention to what the omelet looks like, since it looks pretty normal except for two things jutting out on opposite sides. In trying to determine what those could possibly be, I realized that they don't look like any part of a lake lurk or a mute fruit, and are probably, wait for it, tiny unborn baby Deathclaw feet. That is just so messed up. And also, with the feet so well developed, where the heck is the rest of the Deathclaw? Is there like an option to not have crunchy little Deathclaw feet in my omelet? Is this real life? Another thing I'd like to point out is that since it is so readily available on the strip as a purchasable item, where is this Deathclaw farm that's supplying so many of these eggs? That is a location I'd like to explore. This item is a reference to Rose in Fallout 2, who runs Rose's Bed and Breakfast, where she sells very famous omelets in MODOK. The player can discover the secret to her success by uncovering a Deathclaw that is being used to harvest the eggs that the omelets are made from. Far Harbor strikes again with the Captain's Feast, which is a consumable that is only available after doing the so-called Captain's Dance, wherein the player is required to kill a bunch of Far Harbor creatures. I was always under the impression that the feast came from the meat harvested from the killed creatures, which primarily consists of mirelurks, but looking at the in-game item, it looks a whole lot like just a beef steak, so it seems like I was wrong about that. But those giant mirelurk claws and huge mirelurk hunter tails would make for a killer boil, just saying. The item doesn't heal for any HP but increases experience points by 10% for 2 hours. Fallout 76's City of Helvetia celebrates its German roots by allowing players to craft 2 of their Fasnacht holiday items. The first is the Fasnacht donut, which, while not looking like a donut, is a surprisingly great looking pastry that has been deep fried and dusted with powdered sugar. The stats are not great, with only 25 HP regen and 5 rads, and the recipe is rather involved, using milk, frog eggs, cooking oil, razor grain flour, salt, and spices, but considering all the things you could possibly eat in the Fallout series, I would totally go out of my way for something normal looking by pre-war standards. The Fasnacht sausage is honestly another great looking food item that I would have no problem trying. Healing for about 40 HP and increasing max HP by 40 for 30 minutes. It requires boiled water, intestines, spices, tick, blood, and spoiled meat. Really? We couldn't just have a normal sausage, could we? Molrats are very common animals, and therefore it isn't a surprise that there are a good number of food items made from them. After all, if people are willing to risk their lives to eat a Yao Guai or a Deathclaw, you know Molerat is on the menu. Far Harbor introduced ground Molerat, which is represented as being almost a soup-like substance in a bowl. It is not craftable in Fallout 4, and only heals for 20 HP for 5 rads, which is really not impressive. In Fallout 76, however, it is a craftable item where Molerat meat, boiled water, stilted bean, and pepper will get you the same looking dish for 60 HP, 3 rads, and +3 to agility. Maybe they just don't know how to cook in Maine. Or maybe West Virginia is used to cooking ground up rodents? I'll let you guys fight that one out in the comments. New Vegas has Molerat Stew, which isn't a great item in hardcore, but will heal 60 HP and increase strength by 1 for 2 minutes, which isn't bad. Made with beer, maize, Molerat meat, and a pinto bean pod, this stew is still better than the mystery meat dish from the Ultralux. Lastly, we have Mountain Hawks from Fallout 76 that uses Molerat meat, glowing resin, and vodka. For reference, the glowing resin is a type of sap or tree resin that is harvested from trees in the game. Replenishing 5 HP, dosing for 5 rads, and increasing rad resistance by 10%. I don't really know why they're called Mountain Hawks, but given that they are hawks, then it is using the upper portions of the Molerat legs, which are generally used for seasoning and less so for actual consumption, since there's often more skin and ligaments than any meat. Over at the infamous Mom's Diner, they can make a Molerat manicotti, which for barbarians like myself that have no idea what it is, they are large pasta sleeves that are cooked and filled with some sort of filling, in this case Molerat meat. Lastly, another banger from Mom's Diner is the well-marbled Molerat, which would seem to imply that there is some serious Molerat farming going on as they selectively breed and fatten those guys up. I'd really be interested to know how they would farm Molerats, since they have this proclivity to rip up and dig through just about anything, including the ground. Mom's Diner has come up several times in this video, and has a few more items that didn't fit anywhere else. They are apparently able to make filet mignon, which can't simply just be a Brahmin steak because, come on, it's Fallout. Mom will also ask the player to deliver a meal to Smitty, the car mechanic, and the in-game item and description indicate that it is a salad consisting of pickled green vegetables and a sandwich, with what may be Brahmin meat with a yellow sauce smothering it. That's well, not the worst thing we've covered in these videos by a long shot, but not exactly a Michelin star dinner. Congrats on making it this far. I would like to reward you with this. Moldy Food. With what appears to be old bread and old pear and some sort of old meat, this can be consumed with no penalty other than 6 rads in Fallout 4, and will even give you 5 HP, so if you're really desperate, then it's something at least. Just know in survival it won't lower hunger at all. In Fallout 76, on the other hand, it won't recover hit points, but it will lower hunger a bit, so how about that for a good old Fallout flip-flop? The last entry on this list is one that should have been covered in my first videos, because it is actually a packaged pre-war item. The Happy Pie. Found only in Fallout Tactics, it appears to be some sort of packaged snack pie that, according to the in-game description, is amazingly somehow still edible. Although the HP gained is pretty negligible, landing between 5 and 10 points, there is no other ill effect, not even radiation. Interestingly, the developers had created an addiction to Happy Pies that would have decreased perception and intelligence, but the addiction chance is set to 0, so the player will never get it. I also just want to show you all this wholesome picture with a little Happy Pie and a little happy Brotherhood of Steel member. Aww. And with that, I have gone over all the food of Fallout within this 3 video series. This isn't every edible item, since fruits and vegetables would probably end up in its own video. But if you think I have not mentioned something that I should have, let me know. On to the comment highlights from my plasma weapons video. A good number of you let me know in no uncertain terms that my metaphor about inflicting electrical damage by exciting plasma was like boiling water to heat a pan to cook food was in fact a flawed metaphor, since double broilers do exactly that. Internet 1, Rad King 0. Bathroom Guardian brings up a terminal entry that can be found in the Institute Advanced Systems Division, where there is some preliminary talk about looking into plasma weapons after Phase 3 is complete. That makes the experimental plasma weapon that can be obtained from the Institute even more curious, as it may simply be some sort of isolated tinker project by one of the scientists rather than an Institute-sanctioned project or a larger scale experiment. This also dovetails nicely into many comments that spoke of the Institute not using better weapons because of resource limits. I definitely think this is the case, and this terminal could certainly support that position, since they propose more research after their energy needs are sufficiently met after the completion of Phase 3. There were many ideas floated about how the plasma weapons could work, and I really like the ideas and the creativity. There was everything from adding fictional particles that help the bolt stay together, to waves being used to hold the bolt together over long distances, to a physical projectile like a magnet being shot with the bolt to help hold it together. You guys are really creative, and I like reading through all your ideas. But I don't think we will ever get an explanation, since exactly how plasma works is not that important in the scheme of Fallout's universe. That said, we should really get more lore fleshing out the backgrounds of plasma weapons and how the different types of models are related to each other. So this guy, sorry mate, I don't know the Cyrillic alphabet, mentioned that the tube at the front of the Fallout 3 plasma rifle looks a lot like a cathode ray tube. And as soon as I read that, I totally saw the similarity. I certainly think that that is the design inspiration for at least that element of the plasma rifle. A few of you commented and were dubious of the suggestion that the Novasurge plasma pistol was connected to alien technology. While the safe is in a pile of debris, and it seems like the aliens take many things and leave them in piles around parts of the ship, I find the fact that this specific item was taken up by aliens after it had been buried at a random spot in the desert to be very telling. The chances of an alien ship finding just some random item in the desert somewhere is incredibly small, but it would make more sense if they were intentionally seeking out the weapon, or if the weapon had energy signatures or materials that they were able to detect with sensors and were interested in. That is why I still think that the fact it was taken up by aliens when it was suspected to be derived from alien technology and hidden away, buried underground somewhere in the desert, to be pretty solid proof of the claims that it came from alien technology. It just seems too unlikely that the aliens would have put in the effort to find one tiny little hidden object without actually looking for it. Sab Lyeth had a good observation that some exterior tubing on Smitty's plasma caster is the same thing that can be found on the MF Hyperbreeder Alpha, and while the obvious explanation is asset reuse, I would like to think that there is some technology overlap between the two designs. Vargan1414 pointed out that there is some visual similarity between the alien power cells and the plasma cartridges. I will say that I do see a similarity in the cylinders. Other than them both obviously being a cylinder filled with some colored substance, the ends as well seem to have the same looking terminals. Maybe this is just us reading too much into things. Or this is another clue as to whether or not plasma weaponry is derived alien tech. I would also like to say that to have technology derived from alien tech, it wouldn't necessarily be a one-for-one copy. Materials science is very important to the advancement of technology, and if the alien tech uses advanced materials that Fallout science cannot completely copy or understand, then they would need to find a workaround for that. That could account for the differences that we see. Thank you all for partaking in Adam's wisdom. Take care of yourselves, and may you go forth and preach the word of Adam.